Good morning, and hi again, and welcome. Going to start with a bracha and then the screen share, and we'll take another look as we progress through the story. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Wait, that is. All right. Find the in here, I believe. Hmm. I thought it was in the place. There we are. So again, we have just read how Joseph has revealed his identity to his brothers, how he's had to reassure them, and this conversation continues now. V'hakol nishma beit paro. So the voice was heard in the house of Pharaoh because there was a lot of crying, emotional outpouring going on. Lamor, people telling Pharaoh, Ba'u Ache Yosef, Joseph's brothers have arrived, Vayitav Beinei Pharaoh, and this was good in Pharaoh's eyes. In other words, Pharaoh approved of this. Uve'enei Avadav, and in the eyes of his servants. So everybody was really happy to know that Joseph's family, Joseph's brothers, had actually come to Egypt and were with him. And here is the Rashi. V'hakol nishma beit paro. The voice was heard in the house of Pharaoh. Kamo bebeit paro. So in other words, let's look at the Hebrew a little more carefully. Uh, so yes, so it says simply, Hakol nishma beit paro. The voice was heard, house of Pharaoh. And Rashi just says there's a little bet missing there. It's not necessarily missing. Grammatically, it's okay. And it just simply means in the house of Pharaoh, that bet here. V'zehu lashon bayit mash. And he says before he had mentioned that Beit Paro previously meant his courtiers, his household. Here Rashi points out that it means in the palace. People could hear these sounds in the palace. Vayomer Paro el Yosef, Pharaoh said to Joseph, Emor el achecha, say to your brothers, Zot asu, do this. Ta'anu et be'irchem, load up your animals, ulachu vo'u arza Canaan, and go and come to the land of Canaan. So load up your animals who are with produce. In other words, they came down for that, and so that's what they need to do. They should fill them with produce. But ukhu et avichem ve'et batechem, and take your father and your households, uvo'u elai, and come to me, ve'etna lachem et tuv eretz Mitzrayim, and I will give you the goodness of the land of Egypt, the best of Egypt, ve'ichlu et chelev haaretz, and you can eat of literally, right, the fat of the land, uh, the best of the land, the cream. Et tu eretz Mitzrayim. So what's the best place in the land of Egypt? Eretz Goshen, the land of Goshen. And this is Rashi's comment on this. Niva, Pharaoh was prophesying. Ve'eno yodea ma niba, and he didn't know, he didn't understand what he was prophesying. So far that in the end, Egypt would be made, that's understood, la sota kimitzula she'ein ba dagim, like a fish pond which doesn't have fish in it. Meaning that when the Israelites left Egypt after their enslavement, remember, we talked about the text talks about how they stripped the Egyptians. And that's the prophecy here, that he was prophesying how the Israelites eventually would, when they were set free, of course, that he wouldn't have known either, that they would take the best of Egypt with them. Chalev haaretz, so he says, this chalev, kol chalev. Every time you come across this word chalev, lashon meitavhu, it's talking about the best, like the cream of the crop, just as in English, we understand the word the same way. V'ata tzuveta zot asu, and you are commanded, this you shall do. Chu lachem me'eretz Mitzrayim, take from the land of Egypt, agalot letapchen velin sheichem, take wagons for your children and for your wives, unasetem et avichem, and that way carry your father, uvatem, and come to Egypt, come here. Yud Tet, V'atat mi pilo marlahem. So Pharaoh is talking to Joseph and saying, you are commanded, mi pi, from my mouth to say to them. You should let them know that you heard this from me personally. Zot asu, this is what you need to do. Kach emor lahem shebershutihu. Say to them that it is with my permission, my express permission, that that this is all under Pharaoh's authority, that they're doing this. Ve'einchem al tachos al klechem, and do not concern yourselves. Literally, it says, and your eyes do not be concerned over your possessions. Meaning, don't worry about leaving your possessions back in the land of Egypt, that you're not going to be able to transport everything that you own from the land of Canaan down to Egypt. Itu kol eretz Mitzrayim lachem hu, because the best of the land of Egypt will be yours. Vayasu chen b'nei Israel, and the children of Israel did this. Vayiten lahem Yosef agalot, and Joseph gave them wagons, carts, al pi paro, at Pharaoh's express wish. Vayiten lahem tzed ala derech, and he gave them provisions for the way. Ulachulam natan ish chalifot smalot. I love this. As I've said before, our connection to the rag trade is very deep and abiding. And it says, and to all of them he gave each person a suit of clothes, a change of clothing. Chalifot, chalifa, I think, is in fact the Hebrew modern word for a suit. Ulevin Yamin, but to Benjamin Natan Shlosh Me'ot Kesef, he gave him 300 pieces of silver, V'chamesh Chalifot Smalot, and he gave him 5 changes of clothing. Ulo Aviv Shalach Kazot, and to his father he sent like this, Asara Chamorim, 10 donkeys, Nosim Mituv Mitzrayim, bearing the goodness of Egypt, some of the wonderful things of Egypt, the Eser Atonot, and 10 mules or she asses, Nosot Bar Valechem Umazon, carrying grain and bread, could be food, Umazon, again, produce, food, la'aviv ladarech, to his father for the way. So there's a really interesting understanding of this because of the language that is being used, that it says kazot, like this, right? And to his father he sent like this. And let's take a look at how Rashi handles this. And then we have this listing, right? Shalach kazot. So the let's say the superficial meaning is kecheshbon hazeh, like the following listing: umahu and hacheshbon. And what is this account? 10 donkeys, etc. So here we go. You can see there's this parenthetical statement here. Ritzono shemilat kazot meyuteret. Uh, he wants you to understand that the word kazot hameyuteret is which is seems unnecessary, right? Uvachaf hadimayon, and also is added to that the kaf at the beginning of the word kazot, like this. It means the kaf of comparison, something like something else. More, it actually is to inform us, al ki me'olam lo shalach lo, that it's to tell you that he never actually sent him 10 donkeys, eser chamarim, the eser atonot. He never sent him 10 donkeys and 10 she-asses. Rak hachi kamar, but this is really what it was trying to say, tell us. This scriptural verse. Ula aviv shalach, then to his father he sent, ba'agalot, in those carts, in those wagons, kazot, as is the following, etc. Klomar, in other words, kecheshbon hazeh, like this amount, shehu masa asara chamorim, which would be the amount that 10 donkeys can carry, the eser atonot, and 10 she-asses, the hashta ate shapir. And now this makes perfect sense, this understanding of it, that he didn't literally send him 10 donkeys, etc., but he sent him the amount of that they could bear, that they could carry. And this makes total sense. The lo matzinu nichtav, because we don't we only see written down in the scripture itself. Vayar et ha'agolot, he saw that is Jacob saw these wagons. Velo shum chamurim, and it doesn't mention anything about him seeing these donkeys or these she asses. And this could be the kaimalan and that QED. So just sort of a deeper understanding of this, of the actual syntax and the grammar of the verse. B'shem hagaon maharshal, and he's saying, I bring this in the name of the great rabbi, the Maharshal, and that the Maharshal is a commentary you'll find at the back of the Vilna Shas, the Vilna Talmud, and it's I believe it's Shlomo Luria. His name is Shlomo Harav Shlomo Luria, and he has a beautiful commentary which consists both of halachic pilpul and halachic analysis, and also agadic analysis. He has both in this particular writing at the back of the Gemara. Mituv Mitzrayim, from the best of Egypt. Matzina beGemara, we find in the Gemara, Sheshalach lo yayin yashan, that he sent him old wine. Shedat zkenim nocha hemenu, because elderly people enjoy it, they appreciate it. Midrash Agada, and there's also a midrash grisin shel pool. So I'd say groats of beans. So what again, the significance of that, I have to tell you, there's obviously some purpose to them saying that, to being that specific, but nothing is sort of jumping out at me as to why they would have wanted to choose that. Bar valechem katargumor. So grain and bread. And let's see, here we go. Yes. Ibur valachem. So ibur would be produce and lechem, or grain and bread. Mazon, he says, mazon refers to liptan. Liptan is like relish, something like that. Kach girsat Rav. This is the version of the text of this rabbi, the Ram, or
Um,
the name. Yes?
so in Chabad, the thing about the beans,
Yeah.
it says, and the thing about the wine too, it says that, elderly people find contentment in wine, and then there's a parenthetical, wine improves with age. And then about the beans, it says it refers to pounded beans, which
Okay.
have a
Yeah.
soothing effect on a troubled spirit.
Interesting. So there may be other statements. I mean, the Talmud quite often, you know, mentions the effects of different food. So that could well be that it's mentioned somewhere else in the Talmud as to the positive effects of these beans that are pounded into groats.
And then for the mazon, it says things eaten with bread.
That's what I'm saying about
Yeah.
relish.
Okay, yeah, accompanying the.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Onwards. Vayishlach et Echav vayelechu, and he sent off his brothers, and they went. Vayomer Alehem, Vayomer Alehem, he said to them, Al tigazu vadarech, don't quarrel along the way, on the way. Al tigazu vaderech, vadarech is a causal form, do not quarrel on the way. Lo titasku. So it's interesting how the interpretation goes on this. Al titasku b'dvar halacha. Do not become deeply engaged in a matter of halacha, in legal discussions, right? Shelo tirgaz aleichem haderech, that you not lose your way, that the way not become difficult for you. And there's a bunch of discussion elsewhere where they talk about, I think in Siftei Chachamim, he says he wasn't saying to them, don't discuss halacha at all, because that's actually a very good thing to do. And there are many examples given of rabbis who are walking along and discussing some point of halacha. So he says the issue is that they shouldn't kitasku, referring to sort of go deeply, deeply into it, a deep, deep discussion. That's what that is referring to.
Mhm.
Well,
Again,
something, can I say something?
please.
Something, yeah, something also that jumps out at me as you can't just always be black and white. There are different shades of gray,
Yeah.
depending upon your circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The
Yeah.
question for me, okay, that's interesting, is why did they choose to go in this direction? Right? I mean, that's the thing I don't that I'm puzzled about, because my sense is there's always a reason why they are giving these sorts of explanations.
Well, I think that
You
I think it just that halachic discussion is seen as something that you could absolutely get lost in and
Mhm.
lose your focus,
Mhm.
and
Right. Mhm.
they're just warning about that.
I understand that, but the point is, why dafka this? There are plenty of certainly it's not upshot, okay, and again,
Not necessarily in their
what's
eyes.
what's but I feel that there is something behind this, that there's a special reason why they chose to interpret this. In other words, what's its relationship to the rest of the story? What's its relationship, this particular interpretation? What's its relationship to Joseph's relationship to his brothers now, etc. So I feel there's a lot more to this
Well,
than is just jumping out.
I'm glad you said about his brothers, because then I was having a similar thought. Maybe the concern is that because they're feeling guilty and thinking about the past, about what they did, they might be more than usual reflecting on Torah and the right things to do, and kind of atonement for what they did, both Torah study as atonement, in a meta way, but also thinking about their own actions and what they should have done, and how things could have been, could
Right,
be
right. Now
different.
that is actually something Rashi is going to mention as the pshat of the text, but he doesn't take it in the way, your interpretation, sort of an interesting thing. In other words, in because that's the one thing that clearly he's concerned about, is that they're going to berate themselves about it. So, you were making some connection between, by getting deep into halacha, maybe they will understand themselves. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's way off. I think there is some connection there, but I'm still not happy entirely that I get what they're saying here.
But
Maybe-
also the Torah study
Right.
is a method of atonement
Yes, no,
in
no,
general.
that's and from that point of view, that might indeed satisfy why they went in that direction. I mean, there are lots of ways to atone. Torah study is a very important thing. I mean, he's talking specifically about a dvar halacha. So in other words, we're looking at a specific element, a specific mitzvah,
Yeah, I
and
see what you're saying.
understanding that better. Um,
Right.
But
Obviously the
also,
halacha talks about those sorts of things. It would have been helpful then if Rashi had said, the halacha of something, right?
Mhm.
To give us a better sense of what. But this is sort of just a general statement of halachic discussions. Don't engage in deep halachic discussions.
okay, I have another point to try and interject there.
Sure.
Is that, and even with the brothers, if the point had been labored on too much and too strongly, there would have been no chance for people to come to their own realization of what they need to do in order to do teshuvah. And maybe as you're walking with in your direction, you would want to, and this is aside from that, we're just going to something else. When you're walking in a direction and you want to keep your values, you want to keep halakha, but you don't want people to turn away from it, then it's better not to get deeply into something all the time. It's better to do it in palatable pieces, and that life can also continue at the same time, to be able to reflect in order to have it into your life. You can't harp on it all the time or speak of something so important all the time.
And maybe halacha because they're going up to Israel from
Hmm.
Egypt,
Hmm.
and where it's going to be, they didn't seem to be like, the brothers seemed to be, when in the earlier days, rebellious. And maybe if they were halachic, it was just because they were living in their father's house and doing their father's things, but it wasn't their thing. And maybe now that they're going back up to the Israel and going up to their father, it's they're thinking about specifically how to behave in a more Jewish way.
It's like the kids. You can't tell them all the time what to do because they have their own, rebellion, like you said, Lauren. But as you mature over time, you can embrace things that you couldn't before.
Yeah, I'm also sort of looking at, tirgas aleichem haderech, right? This word rogez basically means anger. It comes from a word that that connotes anger. I'm going to let it go for now, and maybe
But that kind of
something will
backs
come
it
to
up,
one of us.
saying that if too much discussion of halakha could also anger them, because it's a source of poignancy for them to know what they did wrong and that they have to go back up.
Well, there's no doubt about it that a deep halachic discussion can get you quite passionate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But again, I'm still feeling a need to, that there's something more to it. That just hold out. Let me move on here. Davar acher, another interpretation. Al tafsiu psia gasa. Do not take large steps, but tikansu b'chama la'ir, so that you enter the city while it is still while the sun is still shining, that you don't enter the city at nightfall. And again, these are all sort of very, strange things. I looked at Siftei Chachamim. We can take a look. He has some stuff to say about this. So there must be, there must be some halacha out there about taking a journey and getting to a city, whether it's their destination or a way stop too early, something like that. Let's finish this up, and then I can see if we have time. I'll go to Siftei Chachamim. Lefi pshuto, and right, it's plain and simple meaning. Shel mikra of the scriptural verse. Yesh lomar, we can say lefi shayu lichlamim, because they had been embarrassed. They had been, or they felt ashamed. Haya doeg, Joseph was concerned, Shema yarivu baderech, that they might start to quarrel and argue while they're heading back to the land of Canaan, al dvar mechirator, regarding his sale, ulehitvakeach ze im ze, and to argue one with the other, velomar, and to say, al yadcha nimchar, this all happened because of you. It was your fault. Ata siparta lashon hara. You were speaking lashon hara about him, alav about him. V'garamta lanu lisnato, that you caused us to hate him, to start to hate him. So, and that certainly does seem to make a lot of sense. That he knew that this was going to be uppermost in their minds. And it's always, I love a statement that I came across quite a few years ago. I'm trying to think of exactly how it goes. To err is human. To put the blame on someone else is even more human. And it's, he knows human nature. He understands human nature. I mean, we see it. It's so lame, right? When you watch it around you and you see people avoiding responsibility at all costs and always blaming other people for their own mistakes and their own bad behavior, as if it's somebody else who caused it. So that's sort of in there, and that I think is straightforward. Let's do just a little bit more. We don't have too much time, but we'll get to the next page. So, Vaya'alu mimitzrayim, they went up from Egypt. Vayavo'u Eretz Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. El Yaakov Avihem, and to Jacob their father. And I think I'm going to stop here and stop the share and give you a chance if you'd like to comment or add any additional thoughts to what is going on. I mean, we clearly are transitioning. This is all sort of a transitional thing because life has been one way up to now, and now that Joseph has revealed himself to his brothers, there now is a moment of transition, of how do you adjust to this?
Even if they were arguing about halacha,
Yes,
they still could have become divisive with each other, and it could have deteriorated into blaming. I mean, that happens
that's true.
no matter what you're arguing about in the family. I mean, my sisters and I do this word game together, and sometimes we get into little arguments, and the arguments can quickly devolve, especially with siblings, and
Right.
into like more blamefulness and upset, and divisiveness.
Right, right. But I guess where I'm going for is, I think that's so true, and maybe it's as straightforward as that. But I'm just wondering if there's some more symbolic, issue going on here that as to
Right.
why they headed in that particular
Of
direction.
course.
So that's what's eluding me as of now. I don't have a sense of what its symbolic significance is. And the other thing about the Psia Gasa is just a straightforward halacha. I said I would take a quick look at the Siftei Chachamim, so I will do that. Let me look and see. Okay. This is the Rashi. Let me look at the Siftei Chachamim. So, of course, Siftei Chachamim gets quite technical. All right. Siftei Chachamim doesn't give any sort of rationale along the lines of of symbolic significance. So he goes on to the do not take large steps, and he quotes the Maharshal. This is Siftei Chachamim, writes that Rashi's first explanation. This is a technical issue. Follows one opinion, and Rashi's alternate explanation follows the Baraita there. In other words, quite possibly, let's see. I'm trying to think that whether the first explanation has to do with taking large steps means halachic discussions, and the second explanation has to do with taking the large steps. Rashi also explains, and arrive at your evening destination while there is still daylight. The Baraita, this is a Mishnaic text, its origin, source, Mishnaic source, but isn't in the Mishnah itself. It's contemporaneous. The Baraita itself offered these two explanations. Okay, look at this. So here he says large steps and daylight because it understands tigazu baderech to mean overly intensive walking, but it did not know whether it means taking large steps or walking a long time. That is until nightfall, and my text is doing funny things on my computer. I'm sorry to say, and I tried to get it down a little bit.
We don't see your text anymore.
I know. Well, I stopped the screen sharing. I'm just reading
Okay.
to you. Thus, it offered both explanations, one pertaining to taking large steps and one pertaining to arriving at their destination while there is still daylight. An overly intense person takes large steps, and the rabbis taught large steps remove 1/500th of a person's eyesight. So again, this is not necessarily making it easier to understand, but certainly it gives us a rationale as to why he would not want them to take large steps. But what exactly is problematic about getting to the destination, that day's destination, early? I'm not sure. What's the negative? What's the downside of that? I don't know.
Taking people by surprise.
Maybe
If they were expecting you.
You can't get into your hotel room because you're there too early. Yeah.
I think Facebook labeled that claim about the eyesight as possibly based on false.
Well, again, there are many things like that you see in the Talmud.
Right? I know.
They talk about crying, and again, I tend to take those things seriously and ask the question. There's a reason they're saying these things,
right.
And probably if you understood the reason, it might make a lot more sense.
Right.
But anyway, I'm going to stop the recording.